Hello and welcome back to the channel. It is Mark from Powersonic and Apprentice 121, and today we're going to have a look at installing a solar PV array onto a garden shed. You'll see behind me here, this is my garden shed. For those of you who watched some of the earlier content, you might remember the demonstrations of earthing systems and how we would approach testing earth electrodes in particular. But today we're going to look at putting a solar array onto the shed along with a little inverter. For experimentation purposes, I'm interested to see what kind of generation this can do based on the orientation we're selecting and some of the shading that's involved. We're going to run through the entire thing from start to finish. I'll show you the approach in how we go about selecting the number of hooks we need and also the types of hooks we're using, and equally how we cable all this up and get it generating. So without further ado, let's get on with the video and I'll show you the design and layout first up. So primarily we're using software to do our solar designs, but in this case it's always handy to do a drawing. So this is a nice big A3 sheet of paper, and I've roughly sketched out the roof space we've got up there to install the solar panels onto, and we've got about 5 meters wide by 4.25 meters in depth, and we're going for 8 panels. These are Trina 415s we're putting up there, and by the time we've finished we should have around 400mm between the top and bottom edges and 300 to the sides, so it's a little bit tight on those sides, but there are uplifts that I'll show you for the water drainage, so I'm not concerned about that. And we've got an issue with where we're positioning our rails due to some of the cabling that's running through this timber structure and where our fixings are going to end up, so we'll go into the shed and have a look at that. But as a result, we've had to move this rail here ever so slightly higher than I would have wanted, because we were trying to keep the rails at about 350mm off the top of the panel and the bottom of the panel to stay within an equal fixing zone all the way along. The cable zone at the back of the shed is outside of our rails, so we've got no issue with our fixings going into those. It's just these ones here that were kind of 1700 to 2 meters. This measurement needed to really be 1712. It was a little bit tight, so we've just dropped it back to 1650. Shifted the array ever so slightly up the roof as well to try and give us a bit more tolerance with that, and we're going to end up with about 400mm, which is the upper limit of spacing on those Trina panels, but it should work a treat. Now we're going for hanger bolts on this. I'll show you what they are when we're up on the roof. It is a fiberglass roof, so we're wanting to ensure we get a nice weather-tight fixing onto that, and equally that these are going to be very well held down. I don't want these blowing down the street, and we want to try and keep them as low profile on the roof as well. We're going to try and get them as tight as possible because of permitted development and the maximum height of your garden structures based on the existing ground level. We don't have a lot of room to play with, so that's the reason we're taking this approach, and I'll show you that as we come to do it. But we'll go out to the shed and we'll have a little look about the cable zones and what I'm talking about in there. So I've popped the lights off for the minute so you can see, but we've got a rows of 3 of these spotlights in 2 different places. Now the cabling runs that were selected were used for power and lighting, so it hasn't just got the lighting cables through. You can see we've marked these crosses. We know that they're on these timbers because there's no fixings been applied into the timber when it was first built. We assisted in the building of this shed, so we know where the cable routes are, where the fixings are. There's loads of king span in these as well. They are big bearers, which is why we can use those hanger bolts to screw through. We've got a lot of depth on the timbers. They're nice and chunky and it'll hold it really well, but we don't want to be screwing down into our cables, because then we're going to have to start stripping these cladding sheets off and rewiring stuff, and we do not want to be doing that. So this cable route here, which is on these cross marks, and again it serves, you see them all the way along, it serves the sockets that are dotted around the place and the lighting, so they all kind of run through there, but we don't want to be drilling into them. That one's out of the way, so we're fine with that. We're not going to hit anything in that cable zone. It's not a factor in what we're doing. This one is kind of right on our bottom rail for the first row of panels off the front of the shed, so we've just had to shift our hanger bolts that would have been coming down in this zone just ever so slightly that way, so we know we're not anywhere near them. And then we're good to go. We can see again on the front of the shed, we've just dropped this spotlight down to have a look because we've got 3 out here. However, there's no king span in this side, so we can see the cable route that was taken, because we had forgotten how we did this, but they do essentially run in back to that same cable zone. We haven't taken routes across here, probably to try and avoid weakening these timbers any more than was necessary by utilising the same sets of holes that we had through the shed. So they're in this space as well, and then they just drop out up and onto each light fitting and they are Wago boxed up in there as well, so they're not just chock blocked as is the usual approach with spotlights. So our fixing points, you can see our timbers are marked with these nail holes that have been on all the timbers, so we can see them at the back of the shed as well. We've marked the ones we want to put fixings into. You see the little pencil mark up on here, and then basically every 800, because these are 400 centres, we've gone for a hanger bolt. So that runs all the way along the shed for the 4 rails that are going to run to mount our panels in portrait as I'm stood looking at it now. And we'll jump up on the roof and have a look at that and explain it in a minute, but just to set that out, so we're going to have hooks here. Our array will end roughly 150mm after that last hook point, which is about on tolerance for what we need. Because we're using the hanger bolts and the clamps that I'll show you when we come to fasten the rail to the hanger bolts, we're going to get it really low down on the roof. That will impact airflow and the potential for keeping these in optimal conditions in the summer months when temperatures are higher, but equally, as I said, we're trying to work within that maximum ceiling height on this roof here, and we don't have a lot to play with. You'll see at the back of the house we've got plenty of trees in there, so there's a lot of shading going along, and the sun kind of comes up over here, runs across the back of these trees. Now we're in September, it doesn't really peek into the garden until it's over this side, then it zooms over that way, and it continues off to the west in this direction, so it sets between the 2 houses there. And as a result, this roof does hit a fair bit of sunshine in the afternoon. We're going to use Optomisers on them, and obviously through winter these trees will be out of leaf and they'll pick up a little bit. The roof is angled down towards the back of the garden, so they are going to be sort of angled ever so slightly to the south. We're not going to put any ballast kits on or any kind of surface system where you can angle your panels to different angles to the actual roof structure. We're just going to fix these down, and again that's to do with trying to work within that maximum height that we've got on this structure. We don't want to be putting these up any higher than necessary. And I've run the calcs through Easy PV, and these 8 panels should kick out for us over the year around 1600 kilowatt hours, so it's not a bad point of generation just for 8 panels and a little inverter down there. And again, we've got our export limited off the main inverter in the house, and we're going to show you how we set all of that up as well through the course of this video. So next up, we'll go and get the roof marked for where all these fixings are going to go, and I'll show you how we're set up there. I've got my team of workers here. You can see they're itching to go. We've got Cooper. How are you, Cooper? And Bruno. Ready to jump up there, guys? No? Okay, better get Matthew. So you should have just seen us marking out this roof with a string line. So you see we've got our chalk lines in, running front to back. We can see the timbers on the back, and we've popped screws in along the front. These are 800 centres all the way along, as I've shown you, and we've now measured off based on our plan that I also showed earlier for our marks, where we're now going to pilot drill and then drive in the hanger bolts. And I'll put you back on the stand and show you us doing that in a minute. We've got 6 rows, so there will be 24 hanger bolts going in onto this roof, which is ample. And these are 6x3 timbers, I think, in the roof space. That was mainly for the Celotex that's in there, because the building below is insulated. 2 building regs for a full-on house equivalence in essence. But we'll get these hanger bolts driven in, and I'll show you us doing that in just a sec.
So these are the hanger bolts going in, and as you'll see, we are pilot drilling first. It's a 7mm bit just to open up the timbers, So these hanger bolts go in nice and easily. We're also putting a good bed of silicone into the hole and also underneath the washer as well. It's just to try and enable as best weather sealing as we can. And you set the angles of these perpendicular to the roof itself. They don't always go exactly as you intend, and there is some adjustment when you come to put the rails on. Down the side of the shed, I'm going to place the inverter, all the isolators, and both the AC and DC cabling. I wasn't given authorization to use this inside the shed, so we're popping it outside. It's an IP66 inverter. All the isolators are rated for external use as well, so I'm quite happy to do so. And this is the Solis inverter. Using the M2 isolators here, these are absolutely brilliant. If you've not tried one, there is loads of wiring room in the M2 enclosures, and they are also very good quality in the terminal cage clamps. One of the better rotary isolators out there. So if you've not given those a try, well worth picking one up. They're also excellent value as well. So we've got our 2.5mm cable coming in. It literally backs straight onto the consumer unit down here in this shed, and that runs straight through into our AC isolator before the flex lead that goes off to this Solis inverter. I think it's a 3.6 kilowatt. It might be 3.68, and that will power that quite happily. So we've got the flex in there, and we'll ferrule the ends, and again, they can drop into the AC isolator to make sure we've got a good sound connection. We have used a stuffing gland coming rear entry into this M2 isolator as well, just to try and weather seal it as best we can. I've put it in reverse, so the gland aspect of it is inside the enclosure, but it will still offer some weatherproofing should any moisture happen to track down the back of that, and not going to cause us problem. And all of the glands for the cables leading outside are obviously coming bottom entry, and that's even on the conduit that drops off the roof. Mat is shaped as a real nice bend around quite a difficult spot over the fiberglass trims, and we're going to put a little stuffer on the bottom of that conduit to stop anything getting inside it at both ends. So even up on the roof, if any insects or water, moisture, whatever was to get inside the tube, it's not going to cause us a problem. And we've got a little drip loop underneath the isolator, so we're going to know that that's going to stay dry as well. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a black stuffing gland of 25mm size in my little kit I'd brought for the job. I will change it for a black one later on, but for the time being, little white one on there is going to do just the job. And again, set the PV cable into the right length, so you've got the nice loops that you want external and on show, and also plenty of length inside the isolator should you ever need to make the ends off again, or if something needs shuffling around, there's the option to do that. And these isolators have the buzz bars across the top, so it goes through the make and break contacts in the isolator in two separate places. I believe that's just to help a little bit with the current and voltages that are flowing in these isolators to give them a better chance of opening successfully. We're just popping some clips on to try and neaten all this up with Matthew's super duper mini hammer, and then we can jump up onto the roof again and see where we're up to on that front once all this is closed up, nice and safe, ready for the next stage.
So you will have seen us fixing these hanger bolts down. We're now waiting for the hammerhead fixings, the kind of cut in half figure of eight that fits into the rail and fastens onto there. I'll show you when we get them. We're waiting for them to arrive, but in essence, once we've got them, they just fit onto all of these. So we're going to get these rails as low down as we can on this roof, because as I said, we're trying to keep the max height to an absolute minimum, and then we can try and get the 8 panels up here. We've measured out, we've got our DC strings coming up here. We've just bagged the ends for now in case it happens to start raining. I'll show you down where the inverter is at the other side, but we've tubed all that up as well. We'll put a little stuffing gland on the end of here so we know no moisture can drop back down that conduit, and then the panels will live on top of that, and hopefully we'll get 8 here. Now, as I say, the trees give quite a lot of shade in the sun. It's just moving there, and it'll now track over that way, and we'll get lots of nice generation tied with the system on the house, where we've got, how many we've got on there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8 panels on this side, 3 on the west side, combined with 8 here, which have actually laid flat. There's like a 10-degree angle at most aimed to the south, but obviously with them being flatter as the sun comes over that direction, they will still generate. It'll be interesting to see what they actually kick out. I'll come back when we've got the fixings for these and show you how they go in, and then we're ready to pop the panels on. We're going to have to grind these down, otherwise the panels are obviously going to foul them when we're laid on the rail, so we're going to have to cut them down with a bandsaw, actually, not the grinder, and I'll show you all that, and we've got it ready for the panels going on in just a bit. So you'll see on here I've set the target to 15 Newton meters. This is the required value of torque that the bulk rail needs onto the fixings. So we're going to use these hammerhead fixings. They simply slot onto these hanger bolts that drop out into the roof, and then they clip on into the rail. I'll show you how it all goes together while I tighten them up with this. So you can see these bulk cut in half long number 8, for want of a better description, hammerhead fixings. They drop on, as I said. You can take them down to the height you need. You then need to twist them into the rail and make sure they go vertical. There is a line on the nut as well, so you can see, sorry, on the bolt that threads into this nut, so you can see that you've got it in the right orientation from the front. And pop your M12 torque tool on. The tool does most of the work to bring it down to a reasonable torque, and then you have to do the last bits by hand. So you just work it as you normally would, and you get the audible turn to let you know when you're getting close. It starts to beat that bit faster, and you can see now we're at 15 Newton meters, and we're happy with that one, nice and tight as well. So there you can see we've got the 8 panels nicely fastened down. These are 415 trainers, and they fit in just nice. You can see we've got a good gap around the top. The sun is just waiting to peek around, moves across here, so it's very close to coming to being directly over this array. It'll be interesting to see what it's generating. Even now in the shade from the trees and also the clouds, it's kicking out 200 to 300 watts. So that's reasonable for kind of background generation. We'll see what it peaks up to in just a little bit and close the video up and explain exactly what it is we've done and why we've done it. And there it is from the aerial view. You can see it actually looks pretty decent. I'm very happy with that. My wife is equally happy with it. She had some concerns around how this might look from our house and for the neighbours, but if anything, it's improved the appearance of the roof. The back 4 are still very much shaded, but the front 4 panels now coming into that sunshine. Top left one is a bit dusty, but it is what it is. We'll get them cleaned off and see exactly what they can do. Got them very low down to the roof, as you can see. That was the intended purpose of the exercise. Keep them as low down so we're not increasing our height away from permitted development, and equally we're going to get some good generation out of it. As I said, while it's shaded at the minute, we've got 200 or 300 watts onto the system, and when the sunshine hits it, that should peak even higher. I'm going to keep my eye on it. I'll let you know in this video what that is. And obviously at the time of filming, we're towards the end of September now, so not ideal generating conditions in terms of the sun's height in the sky. Mainly it tracks behind these trees, as I explained earlier on in this video, but in the afternoon, sort of between 1:30 and towards 5 o'clock in the evening, there's still good sunlight hitting this array, so we should be able to get some good numbers out of it. And then in winter, when a few of these trees lose their leaves, some of them keep the leaves all year round, others go bare, so there will be some more sunshine coming through onto there. And these have got the Tigo Optomisers on the panels, so they should be generating to peak performance even when there is elements of shading on certain parts of the array as a whole. And hopefully that helps us get some good numbers from this, and I'll report back in the weeks and months ahead to explain how it is doing. So there you can see we've got the array up on the house behind me there, and we've also got our new 8-panel array onto the shed. It's just going to help level out some production through the course of the day as we're heading towards autumn and winter. And in the summer months, hopefully we get some bigger peaks. It's not going to be all at once, it's going to more spread it around through the course of the day, because the ones on the rear of the house are pointing to the southeast. The ones on the west face roof, which are just to that side, are obviously in a different orientation, so they won't be generating at the same time. And the ones laid flat on the roof, shaded by the trees, are generally going to pick up some generation as the sun moves off the big main array on the back of the house. But it's one to keep an eye on, and if you've got a shed or garden space in your garden and you're thinking about getting solar PV, perhaps the house roof doesn't have the space or capacity to take any solar PV panels, especially if you've got Velux windows and chimneys and dormers and all of the rest of that good stuff. Don't discount it. We've managed to squeeze 8 panels onto this roof. They're 415 watts, so you've got well over 3 kilowatts of generation on there, which is a nice size system by any account. And obviously if you were installing this in terms of getting the maximum value from it, you'd want it pointing in a southerly direction with a good angle on the array and no shading. But when you're faced with more challenging circumstances like I've had here, it's a case of trying to get the best punch from the system as you can all year round. And sometimes that means thinking outside of the box, and it's going to be interesting to see how this actually performs down the line as we move through the rest of the year. Now, I've been watching the system through the course of this afternoon, and it has peaked at around 1.2 kilowatts, which is very, very encouraging. The sun was high in the sky, it was sort of 1:45. It's a bit in and out today, so I can't replicate that consistently, but it's nice to know that it will get up there. That's reasonable production, and even with the background generation of 200 or 300 watts through the course of a day, that all adds into the rest of the system. So while this one was pumping out, say, 400 watts, just as an example, I think the house roof, this one on the back here, was chucking out around 800. So there's a comparison there. There's 9 panels up on that roof, there's 8 panels on this shed roof, they're exactly the same. And roughly double the generation out of the ones on the house roof as to what was on the shed, which is closer than I thought it maybe would be. And I'll report back in future videos. We'll do a few experiments as well. I'm going to come back and run through an entire test sequence on this array on the shed with the TIS, PV check and ISA test, because it's in a perfect position to be able to run through that sequence really easily and have access to the roof space for getting those all important irradiance measurements to input into the test instruments. So hopefully that one will be out next, or the video after. Otherwise, if you've got any questions and you want to join in the discussion around this content, please do get involved in the comments. If you haven't already, remember to subscribe and give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you on the next one.